Hi, United in Recovery family. I'm so glad you've joined us as we continue our messages throughout this month of May. And we began by talking about some of the things that trip us up in our recovery. First, we talked about when we get into the problem of overthinking. Then we talked about when we get into the problem of overworking. And this week we want to talk about the problem of overheating. And we overheat when we let anger take control of our lives. And most of us who are in recovery, who've struggled with an addiction or a compulsive behavior, we are intimately familiar with anger because anger is one of our defense mechanisms. When we're not living the way we wish we were living, we tend to get angry at everyone and everything else and blame everything else. And then that anger comes out in ways that destroys relationships, destroys our serenity, sometimes destroys careers, and many of us have had anger issues that have taken away as much or more than anything else has taken from our lives. So we want to talk about how do we live in a way that avoids this overheating. Well, as we look at anger, the first thing to recognize is that, God gave us anger for a reason. It's there to teach us something. So when you get angry, it's okay to think about anger, but you don't want to live out of anger, right? You don't want to act out of anger. And the folks in AA who wrote the big book, they really got this. They say this, and this is so hard and so challenging and so right. They say if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. That if they indulged, and that's from page 66 of the big book, they said if we indulged in anger, it was going to destroy us. It was going to lead us back in the wrong path, back to addiction, back to compulsive behavior. They go on to say, and this is even more challenging, we avoid retaliation or argument. We avoid retaliation or argument. So they have these opportunities where they're angry, but they avoid it. So what do we do when that anger comes over us? Well, first, we want to understand it, right? Anger is supposed to teach us something. And if we're angry about something, that means there's something that's not right. But I want to share with you something about a way that anger works, right? I don't know if any of you have studied electricity. Some of you may be electricians. But if you understand how electricity works, electricity always takes the path of least resistance, right? That's how a circuit works. You create a path of least resistance and the electricity goes around it. That's why you don't want to be in a swimming pool when there's an electrical storm, because there's not a lot of resistance in water, and if the lightning hits that water, it's going to hit whatever's in that water, right? Okay, so anger is kind of like electricity. Generally, the first thing it does is it takes the path of least resistance. So when anger hits us, the path of highest resistance is to think that we might have done something to contribute to our anger. The path of least resistance is to think that others might have done something. So typically our default mode is going to be that path of least resistance, to push it off on others, and that just makes us sicker. It means we never look inside and think about, what role did I play in this? And it means we begin to resent and sometimes even hate others and live totally without that peace and without that serenity. So the question becomes, when we feel anger, what should we do? What's it supposed to teach us? How do we respond to it? Well, if God created anger, then it has to teach us something. And what anger teaches us is that something's not right, right? We wouldn't be, now, and I want to give you a checklist, right? Okay, it could be that there's something not right with us. We've done something wrong, okay? And we're angry about that. Now, we might take it out elsewhere, but that might be one option. It's us. Two, it's our expectations, unrealistic expectations. Things didn't work out the way we thought they should. We really shouldn't have expected them to, but our anger comes from unrealistic expectations. Three, it comes from others. There are times others do things to us that legitimately leads us to be angry. So how can we handle that? And particularly when we say, well, what about when that happens? We have the right to be angry. Okay, but how has it worked out for you when you've lived that out? Learning to deal with anger is really a step 2 exercise. You remember step 2, came to believe that power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We've tried to handle anger our own way for a long time. How's it worked? And then God tells us a different way. In Psalm 37, verse 8, God says, refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only leads to evil. Right? Don't live out of anger. Don't act out of wrath. So, learn from it, but put it aside in your relationships and live out of wisdom, not out of anger. Okay, so let's dig into those 3 things. What do we do when we're angry at ourselves? What do we do when we're angry at our expectations? What do we do when we're angry at others? How do we process that so that we don't spew it out? Okay, first, you're angry at yourself, right? Here's what we need to do in that moment. That's when we need to go to God for forgiveness. And we need to find in that forgiveness from God the ability and the confidence to live honestly, to admit what we've done, to recognize how we're getting angry at others because we're really angry at ourselves, right? And to recognize that step 2, right? God can lead us to sanity. Like we think, if I admit I have these problems, if I'm really honest about where this anger is coming from, I have to deal with that. I don't want to do that. That won't lead me anywhere good. Actually, it's the only way that does lead you somewhere good, right? We have to trust that God's way is better than our ways. That's when we need to seek forgiveness from God, sometimes from others, and make amends. Okay, what about when it's our expectations? Well, this might actually be the one that is the least painful way. We need to adjust them. We need to think, how did I get these expectations? Are these expectations, do I find them in the Bible? Do I find them in recovery literature? And if I don't, did I find them in our culture? Did I find them in people who were telling me things that might not necessarily be true? Okay, we need to back up then. Say, okay, I need to adjust my expectations, and this is going to lead us to a whole new level of peace in our lives. And then finally, what do we do when we're mad at others, right? And when we're legitimately mad at others, not when we've just projected our anger at ourselves onto them, but when they have actually done something that deserves our anger. How do we handle that? There are a couple things you could do. One thing I would share with you is right then, it's real important in that moment when you realize you're legitimately angry to, one, embrace step 2 and recognize, okay, I'm legitimately angry, but if I act out of this anger, it will not end well, right? That it won't end well. I've got to trust that God has a better way. Many of you embrace the deep breathing techniques, right? I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to breathe deeply. I'm going to count to 10. I'm going to be honest for you. 10 doesn't work for me. I've tried it before, and after 10 seconds of breathing deeply, I go right back into that argument. I need 100. If I have to keep on in a conversation, I'm going to try to count to 100 and breathe deeply. That's going to help me a little bit more. Another thing you can do, if you have time, this is something actually that Abraham Lincoln did. Abraham Lincoln had a habit of writing really nasty letters saying everything wrong he felt about somebody who worked for him in the government who he was mad at because they made a really significant mistake, some of which in the Civil War cost literally tens of thousands of lives kind of mistakes. And he's angry and he's mad and he writes it off and he never sends it. Most of them were burned or thrown away. We know he did it because we found some of them that he kept, but never sent. And the reason he never sent them, in fact, he spoke about it. He said was because they don't do any good. They only destroy relationships, destroy trust, and make things worse to act like that. When someone else has done that to us, what it's important for us to do is say, okay, they've done this to me. I trust that they're human like me, that in a situation like they were in, it's possible I could have acted the same way they acted. That's just humility. That's putting ourselves on this level. Then we need to say, what do I need to do so that I personally can let go of this and can heal? And sometimes it's as easy as saying, you know what? I'm going to let go of that. Other times the question becomes, okay, maybe it's something so bad I need counseling, but what do I need for me? And then the next question becomes, how can I respond in such a way that holds open the possibility of reconciliation within the relationship? Now, sometimes these are like the little things that happen in families or in with coworkers, like all during the day. And it's like, we're not talking about big deal reconciliation. We're talking about, okay, how can we get back in a good frame of mind to relate to each other for the rest of the day? Sometimes we're talking about like we've been estranged for months or years. Big deal. But it's the same steps, right? It's the same steps. Humility, recognizing I could have done that to somebody else, but not for the grace of God. There go I. Then allowing time and space to allow the emotions to come out of us in a manner that doesn't harm others and allows us to reflect on them in a manner that leads to wisdom. And then what are the steps that I can take that holds open the possibility of reconciliation in the future? Now, of course, when we're the ones who've been wronged, reconciliation involves the other party too, right? That you can't always overlook everything, but we don't have to hang on to that anger because it eats us up from the inside out. So perhaps in your open share groups tonight, it's a good time to discuss where do you experience anger? How has it come out in an unhelpful manner? Are there times when you've harnessed it and allowed it to be helpful and lead to wisdom rather than to wrath? Because that's where we're directed by the Scriptures. So I want you to know that is possible. I believe step 2 is absolutely true, that there is a higher power who can lead us to sanity. I believe one of the things that our God does is He allows us to learn how to handle anger in a way that leads to wisdom rather than wrath. I'm so glad we were able to talk about this together. I pray for you as you try to live it out. Please pray for me, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.